Hello, I'm Lily Forrester, host of the Life and Anth podcast. Thank you so much for spending your 2024 with us. We hope you had some relaxing time off and are ready to take on the big issues with us in the new year. Making this podcast was one of the great highlights of my 2024, and I hope it was one of the small highlights of your car rides, cleaning sessions, morning walks, or however you choose to listen. I can't wait to see what we unpack next. Happy New Year.
Greetings and welcome to this latest series on podcasting, The Power of Podcasting. I'm your host, Kimberly Gunn with Zoomcatchers. Super excited to be launching this discussion with some cool, interesting indie podcasters. They're going to be telling us about their podcasting journey, why they decided to do it, and sharing their passion for their various topics. I'm super excited to introduce one of our own, Lily Forrester. Hey, Lily, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Kim?
Doing awesome. Super excited to have you on so that people can see the face behind the Life and Anth podcast series. So before I turn it over to you, I'm just going to introduce you and tell people more about you. You have been a part of the Zoomcatchers team for a couple years now. So excited to have you on the team and to be working with you on this latest project. And some fun facts about Lily, because I do have a couple. She is a recent graduate of Wellesley College, graduated with the highest honors the school has. Also a basketball player out there on the basketball court, showing her diverse talents and skills. And also an intermediate Russian speaker. I didn't know that about you. So Lily, tell us more about who you are and how you decided to get into podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have always sort of been a storyteller. Even in high school, I would say that my friends would pinpoint that a lot of conversation that I would have was in story form. And so I sort of just took that and ran with it. I would sometimes perform at some open mic nights, like comedy bits and everything. And then I got a lot more serious when I got to college, and my storytelling took sort of a more nonfiction tone, and that transitioned me pretty nicely into anthropology as a major. And I went through several anthropology classes before I started creating podcasts as my final project. One of my professors sort of preferred that format. As a result of that, I developed kind of a repertoire of final project podcasts. For the first time, I think, really felt deeply in touch with the work I was creating, thinking this is like an accessible way that people can engage with this sort of framework. You don't get that a lot with anthropology. It is sort of a gate-kept discipline. A lot of times an issue people have is that professors, they're writing their work and they're publishing it specifically for other professors. We have that sort of cycle of academic reproduction, which is something I think about pretty deeply. And so I thought this sort of has an impact. It brings it out of that academic space and into the hands of the public. And as a result of that, I decided to create that as my thesis track. So originally I was going to thesis and I was going to create a body of podcasts to submit for review. I decided sort of last minute to graduate early and therefore did not actually complete my thesis. But the project and the nature of the project was something important to me, and I wanted to continue thinking about anthropology post grad. And Zoomcatchers sort of, took a turn into the world of podcasting, and I thought this could be a wonderful opportunity to continue our work together and take that into the next phase. So that's why I created Life and Anth.
Awesome. Yeah, it's super exciting to hear. So you've done stand-up comedy routines?
Years ago, it's not something I would revisit.
I learn something new every day about Lily. Just a quick question, because I know, everyone's heard of the term anthropology. What actually is anthropology? How would you define that for, the layperson out there who might want to know what it means?
Sure, and I think that's something that plagues the anthropology community quite a bit, is that so many people just don't actually know what it is. The sort of tagline I give people is, if you know what sociology is, you know what anthropology is. Those two disciplines used to be the same thing, and they had sort of a schism, a little split, and that is basically just in carrying out their research, they differ. We ask all the same kinds of questions about very large groups of people, about culture, and about generally what the human tendency is and why. And we do it by picking a culture to essentially live with and observe, and we gather data in a more qualitative way than sociology does, but we are seeking to answer the same questions.
Wow, That is really interesting because it sounds obviously highly academic, but I think with your podcast, Life and Anth, you've been able to kind of break down a lot of the academia with it and put it into regular terms that regular people can understand. So let's talk a little bit about Life and Anth. I mean, Anth is a abbreviation for anthropology, obviously. But what specifically got you thinking you wanted to talk about the various topics in your series?
The first topic I deal with is one that was very close to home. It was a tale of two Wellesleys, and it sort of juxtaposed the culture of the town of Wellesley and the College of Wellesley. I had sort of a personal investment in that because I was living in it. And that's always like a sort of good place to jump off from. You know, you have so much exposure to it. And then when you get down the line a bit in anthropology, they do sort of advise you to study outward a bit, not necessarily 100%. But that seemed like a good place for me to start because I was deeply familiar with it, intimately familiar with it. So I picked that topic for the first one just to get those terms in our repertoire a bit. The second one I am also deeply involved in. It was recreational fitness, and I not only am a regular participant in recreational fitness, but work in a gym. That's another sort of space that I had a lot of exposure to. The reason I pick these spaces is that when you live in a certain culture, whether that's a gym culture or a college culture or a town culture, you start to notice certain phenomena that you then apply the anthropological framework to. So when you're living in a specific culture, whether that's a gym culture or a town culture or college culture, you apply the anthropological framework to it and you can sort of start to ask these questions. And so I would say that those are questions that I just pondered in my daily life and then decided to develop out in podcast form.
Awesome. I think that's really interesting because I've obviously listened to the podcast. Love the podcast, by the way.
Thank
Congratulations
you.
on that. And I thought it was interesting just the connections that you see and you observe and how you're able to put that into a script and tell a story. Tell us more about that process, how you take those connections, those patterns, and then actually put it into a story that someone can listen to and follow along.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that comes with a great deal of research. Initially, what you have to know is that the question that you're asking is going to have an interesting answer. If you eventually find through research and through study that there's no connection between the two things you thought maybe there was a connection between, then that's sort of equivalently interesting. So I think that one important facet of anthropology is a willingness to find anything about people sort of fascinating and telling, even if what you initially thought was wrong. So, what I do is I sort of pose a question first, and then I deep dive into research on maybe the history of the culture that's being studied, the history of the town, the history of recreational fitness. And I develop out, applying historical context into sort of what I have noticed about culture today. And that's sort of a unique part of anthropology is that the ethnographer or the anthropologist, they get to sort of inject their own worldview into it. And I would say that that is very helpful in creating a narrative because it's actually an essential piece of anthropology is injecting your own worldview. So I always take those two things, both the historical documents and then my own experience in there. I combine it into this running storyline that sort of drags you from point A to point B.
Love it. I think it's very effective. And, in particular with episode 2, that was touchy subjects. You know, I learned so much just about the fitness industry, and I thought you did a great job of giving us some facts and figures about the industry. And I'll let you take it from there. How did you pick that topic in particular? And then did your research lead you to those points of interest that are in the podcast episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're asking is sort of interesting because in the episode, I do discuss watching a video that led me to think about the power dynamics that exist in recreational fitness. It's a video of a personal trainer, and he is standing in front of a woman he's training, and he asks her to go into a deadlift and he sort of touches her inappropriately, and I thought what an abuse of power, which is just a very commonplace abuse of power that takes place when people are given a role of authority, which extends far beyond the recreational fitness space. And I think that's sort of an essential element of these questions is that they can apply much more broadly than the space we're specifically discussing. So, I exist in a gym culture, and it is a class culture at the gym where I work, which is much more gendered female, I would say. And so we deal with a slightly different set of power dynamics. But sort of thinking about how power and gender interplay led me to the creation of touchy subjects and thinking about how those power dynamics play out in the recreational fitness setting.
Hmm. Hmm. Awesome. And then, my follow-up question to that is, what do you hope audience, viewers and listeners, because it's a video podcast, it's also an audio podcast. What do you hope audience, listeners, and viewers take away from your podcast?
I hope that more people start thinking about anthropology, and I mean that sort of genuinely. I hope that people do it accidentally. I hope that people are at their parties with their friends and thinking about the cultures that they have created in their own sort of insular friend group and how they vary from other friend groups they may have, about how power structures are injected into everything that we do as human beings. And I hope that some more people then would be interested in reading up on anthropology and engaging in anthropology. And ultimately, I hope that that would add a bit more diversity to the field and longevity as well.
Those are great things to hope for. Based on my own research, it seems like anthropology plays a huge part in our lives without people necessarily realizing that. I wonder if you could speak to that. It seems like it's this invisible through line to a lot of aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you're absolutely right about that. And I think that one thing that is inescapable here is that culture is in everything that we do. And there are infinite iterations of culture. So if you are existing in a family dynamic, you have a culture there. And if you're existing as an American citizen, there's a culture there. And it's varied, and you have a different role in each place. And anthropology says, okay, let's break it down and let's discuss why you have the position of power or the lack of a position of power that you do, and what an essential piece of an ethnography also is sort of what do we do from here. And so I would say whenever we're carrying out discussions of power and government or other forms of power as well, we are actually carrying out an anthropological conversation, whether or not you have the terminology for it.
Wow. You hear that, everybody? You're carrying out anthropological conversations all the time,
Every day.
and you don't even realize it. And that's probably the beauty of the field, right? Because it sounds so scientific and research oriented, but based on the series that you're producing, I can see the relevant applications for everyday life. I mean, we all are in situations where there's some power dynamics playing out. And, one of the things I really appreciate about your series and the episodes is the way it's presented. You leave the viewer or the listener to come up with their own conclusions about things. And you leave a lot of opportunity for people to want to explore these topics further. Was that intentional?
Well, I think that an issue that probably all disciplines in the social sciences have had in the past, but particularly anthropology, is that ethnographers and anthropologists have historically tried to assert that their stance on an issue is correct. And we have seen throughout time that the discipline has changed its view on things a lot, its method of thinking about things quite a bit. And all the anthropologists who said that they were sort of unilaterally correct about this phenomenon and why it is and what should be have now been sort of denounced and disgraced. I think that I try to take an open ended approach to sort of honor the nature of human culture, which is that it is changing, it's fluid, and it's received differently by everybody who interacts with it. I do think it is intentional that I leave things a bit open ended in Life and Anth because I think that the listener has the authority and agency to form their own opinions based on the information I presented.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it's a really good strategy to put into play with your podcast series because, for me, it made me research more some of the information you provided because you had these interesting connections that I had never thought of. So it's like, oh, that's really interesting. So it made me want to learn more. I loved how you use really uncommon vocabulary. And I think that also makes people have to go do a little research. So I think those are really good ways to get people further interested in the topic and made me want to know more.
Very glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, all of these things are worth researching, but beyond just the topics themselves, if you use that vocabulary, there's a reason we have it. It's because it's a framework, and it's essential to know what words are applying, what theories are applying in different spaces. And so, beyond just researching the topics further, there are all of these theoretical frameworks that I'm introducing that you then can take and apply infinitely in your own life.
You hear that, folks? Just go check out Life and Anth, and you'll learn a whole lot more about anthropology, but about some other topics as well. You'll probably be surprised at how the material is, it will resonate with you in your own personal life. And we are here with Lily Forrester, producer of the Life and Anth series, and she's talking about her podcasting journey. And I wanted to ask you a question about how do you go about securing your guests for these episodes?
I do a tried and true thing, which is I think about who might be considered an expert in my immediate circle. I've had some friends on, I've had some distant family friends on. I had a guest who was my partner's mom. I try to think broadly about who might have authority, who might have lived experience in these topics, and bring them on. Of course, I must admit that that is a bit limiting in what I can discuss on Life and Anth at the moment. So, just to get the word out there a little bit, if you want to be a guest on Life and Anth, you definitely should reach out to me. The more people I know, the more topics I really can discuss and bring to life.
Awesome. You hear that, folks? This is an opportunity for you to get on Lily's show and be a part of a very interesting and dynamic conversation. I do want to talk about episode 3.
Yeah, I mean, this episode 3 is a sort of fun experiment for me. This is a topic that came to me fairly recently. I changed course a bit because I think that we're in a unique cultural moment in the LGBTQ community. Whenever I find myself in a sort of unique cultural moment, I think, how does anthropology apply to this? And what do you know? Now I have an avenue to talk about it. So I discuss a popular band among the queer women community and what their stage presence indicates about where we are. I'm thinking about it in terms of the sort of pendulum that swings when you have an oppressed group that has fluctuating rights.
Awesome. I'm intrigued already. I'm always intrigued with Lily Forrester and the topics and the connections that she sees in our worlds. And then before we head out, I wanted to get you to talk about what kind of tips and advice might you have for some of these indie podcasters out there like yourself who have a passion for a certain subject or a topic. They want to turn that passion into a podcast. It can seem overwhelming. It's like, where do I start? Do I need equipment? You can always contact Zoomcatchers. We'll help you out. But just to get it going, what kind of advice and pro tips would you have for folks out there?
I would say take pride in your work. I think that there are far too many podcasts that are of the format of just an unplanned conversation between friends. And truthfully, I'm not sure how much leg room you have with that model. You need to do the planning, you need to meet and test, and you need to get Zoomcatchers. You need to put in the work on the front end if you want to create a good product. You're really only as good as the prep that you do.
That is so true. And, as content producers, we see all kinds of content out there. And I appreciate the approach that you've taken to your podcast. You're obviously serious about it. You're proud of the work. You're engaged with your topic. And you're hoping to educate and inspire audience members. So hats off to you for taking this journey. It's super exciting to see it continue to come into being. And lastly, where can we find your podcast?
Everywhere. I mean, honestly, you go on YouTube, it's there for you. It has a sort of delightful feature that increases our accessibility standard a bit, which is a follow along digital text so that you can have it coming in through two senses as well. And we can, of course, supply it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Those are two large avenues where I think most of our listeners come from. And if you are sort of more savvy, find us on Captivate.
Awesome. Literally, life in Anth is everywhere, just like the whole topic of anthropology. And we've been here with Lily Forrester, indie podcast producer, collaborating with Zoomcatchers to produce Life and Dance. Super excited to have had you on. And like Lily said, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.